There's a stretch of land in America that's older than the bones of this country itself. A winding spine of ancient mountains cloaked in mist and mystery. This is Appalachia, rugged, remote, and reverent. A place where time doesn't just slow down, it stands still. The air is thick with the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the silence is rarely empty. The mountains whisper, the woods watch, and the past never really lets go. Appalachia is more than a location. It's a world apart, stretching from the foothills of Alabama to the hollers of West Virginia and beyond. It's a land carved by hardship and held together by deep tradition. Life here is simple, but never easy. The people are proud, private, and fiercely protective of their own. Outsiders are watched with wary eyes, and questions aren't always welcome. Stories are passed down in hushed tones over front porch swings and around fire pits, and many of them warn the same thing: don't go into the woods after dark. Folklore here isn't just for fun, it's a survival guide. It's how you learn which roads to avoid, which cries in the night not to answer, and which old houses you never walk past alone. In Appalachia, the veil between the living and the dead feels thinner. The land itself feels haunted by war, by poverty, by blood oaths and unspoken sins buried deep beneath the moss and shale. Maybe it's the isolation. So many of these communities are tucked far from the beaten path, shielded by thick forests and steep ridges. The outside world doesn't just forget these places exist. Sometimes it wants to forget. But the people who live here, they don't forget. They remember everything, and tonight we're going to remember with them. From cursed mining towns and haunted hollers to cryptids that have roamed the backwoods for generations, these are the stories the mountains keep. Stories that have been whispered for over 100 years. Stories that have chilled the bones of every child raised in these hills. So light a candle, lock your doors, and if you hear something scratching at your windows, don't look. This is Tales from Appalachia, and Harloween has only just begun. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and happy Harloween. This is our first Harloween video of 2025. And I'm so excited to share this with you because it's a great interest to me. You know how there are certain places in the world that just get under your skin? For me, that's Appalachia. I've been kind of obsessed with it for a long time. The mountains, the folklore, the way it all feels alive. There's just something about this region that's both beautiful and unsettling at the same time. It's cool, it's mysterious, and honestly, it's downright spooky, but not in a once-a-year Halloween way. It's deeper than that. It's a feeling. Every acre of Appalachian soil holds human stories, some tragic, some sacred, many forgotten. So today I want to talk about what that feeling actually is, why the Appalachian region has this strange hold on people, and why it feels like time, history, and maybe even something else entirely are all layered right there in the mist. This is where indigenous nations lived and lost their lands, where settlers built homesteads that burned to the ground, where miners carved into the earth and sometimes never came back out. Those echoes linger. Old churches, collapsing cabins, unmarked graves, and ghost towns all feed into the feeling that history never really left. It's just gone quiet. Appalachia has a beautiful dichotomy. There's a tension between deep faith and deep superstition, between modern progress and ancestral tradition. That mix creates a charged atmosphere. People live close to the earth, to death, and to mystery. You'll find a church on one side of the road and a folk healer on the other. A miner will quote scripture and then warn you to not whistle in the dark. It's that paradox, faith and fear, beauty and decay, that gives the region its haunting coolness. Visually, Appalachia is gothic without trying to be. Fog rolls through valleys. Kudzu devours forgotten cars and homes. Cemeteries sit on hillsides. The sound of a distant banjo or a train whistle at night carries across miles of darkness. The decay isn't ugly, it's beautiful, in that melancholic cinematic way that feels both nostalgic and otherworldly. At its core, the Appalachian spooky feeling is about memory. It's the sense that something is always just beneath the surface. A lost soul, an untold story, an energy older than language. The fascination of this region comes from authenticity. Nothing there feels curated or performative. The mystery is real, the danger is possible, and the quiet is alive. So I'm very excited to dive in today and bring you some tales from Appalachia, but first, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video. You know what's scarier than a haunted doll or an abandoned asylum? Holiday shopping. That overwhelming, creeping dread when you realize it's October now, and the gift-giving season is coming for you like a masked killer in a corn maze. But good news, this year I found something that banishes that holiday panic faster than you can say Bloody Mary 3 times in the mirror. It's called Uncommon Goods, and they've seriously changed the way I shop for everyone I love. Whether you're looking for something handmade, personalized, or just completely unexpected, Uncommon Goods has the kind of gifts that make people say, wait, how did you even find this? Where did you get it? It's not your basic candle and coffee gift card situation. I'm talking about stuff made by real artists, small businesses, and brilliant weirdos, the good kind, who dream up the most creative items I've ever seen. So I found this tiny tarot deck necklace, and it's going to be a perfect Christmas gift for my daughter, Nev. I know she's really busy right now, out in the world, making moves, living her best life, so hopefully she won't see this video and spoil it. But she's going to love this necklace. I love this necklace. It's a delicate, intricately detailed brass cage pendant that holds 22 miniature versions of the major arcana cards, and it hangs from an antique bronze chain. Each tarot card is full color and about the size of a thumbprint. They are so detailed and beautiful. The woman who makes this necklace, Stephanie is based out of Denver, Colorado. I read that she's inspired by her love of vintage and Victorian things, and she has so many other beautiful pieces to browse through. Seriously, I wouldn't have found this stuff at some giant mega store, and that's what makes Uncommon Goods so special. And here's something else to love. A lot of other things to love. Many of the items on Uncommon Goods are handmade. You're supporting independent artists, and they give $1 back to a nonprofit of your choice every time you shop. They've already donated over $3 million, and that's not just a feel-good bonus. That's real magic. So whether you're shopping for your secret Santa, your true crime obsessed cousin, or your cat, yes, they have stuff for pets too, Uncommon Goods makes it fun, thoughtful, and way less scary. Way more personalized, way more, special and unique. You're not going to get the reaction when somebody opens a gift and they're like, oh, a coffee mug. Thank you. They're going to open the gift and they're going to be like, what? Where'd you get this from? This is awesome. It's really great. There's so many things to browse through, so many things to check out. Now go ahead, treat your coven to something truly unexpected this holiday season. Hit the link in my description box or scan the QR code and start hunting uncommongoods.com for the perfect gift before they vanish into the night. Make your holiday season unforgettable with Uncommon Goods. Discover one-of-a-kind gifts for everyone on your list and get 15% off your next gift. Thank you so much to Uncommon Goods for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive back into Harloween. To understand the darkness that lingers in these mountains, you have to go back, not decades, but centuries, long before ghost stories and missing persons, before whispered warnings and strange lights in the wood. Appalachia was something else entirely, sacred, untouched, and ancient beyond belief. These mountains, the Appalachian Range, are among the oldest on Earth, believed to have formed during the Paleozoic era. Once taller than the Himalayas, they've been worn down by time into soft, rolling giants. But don't let their age fool you. They've seen everything. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples lived in harmony with this land. The Cherokee called it home. To them, the forests and hollows were alive, not just with animals, but with spirits, some benevolent and some not, and they knew better than to cross any of them. But the balance shattered when colonists arrived in the 1700s. As settlers pushed westward, they drove native tribes from their lands and claimed the mountains as their own. The terrain was brutal, isolated, and civilization didn't reach many of these areas for decades, some not for over a century. The people who stayed, well, they were cut off from the world, and in many ways, they liked it that way. Appalachia became a haven for those who didn't fit in elsewhere. Scots-Irish immigrants, former slaves, outlaws, Civil War deserters, moonshiners, and misfits. They built communities deep in the woods, often miles from the nearest neighbor, and forged lives carved out of rock and hardship. With no doctors, they turned to herbalists and folk healers, wise women who knew which plants could cure and which ones could kill. And with no law, they made their own justice, sometimes swift, sometimes brutal. And with no church nearby, their faith mixed with superstition, forming a unique blend of backwoods Christianity, old world mysticism, and deep-rooted fear. By the 1800s and into the 1900s, coal mining brought brief prosperity, but also tragedy. Company towns popped up overnight, run by coal barons who controlled every aspect of life, whether it be work, food, housing. Generations of men were swallowed up by the mines, their lungs blackened, their families left behind. Some died in cave-ins, others from disease, and many say the mines are still haunted by their cries. Isolation hardened the people of Appalachia. It created tight-knit, fiercely independent communities that didn't trust outsiders and still don't. Stories of missing travelers, strange beasts in the woods, and unexplained lights became more than folklore. They were seen as warnings, because in Appalachia, if you go missing, there's a chance no one will come looking for you, and if they do, they might not find you. Before we go any deeper, there's something you need to know. People who grow up in these mountains learn early on that Appalachia doesn't play by the same rules as the rest of the world. Locals pass down a set of rules, not written in any guidebook, not posted on any trail sign. One woman who grew up here said these rules were more than just advice. They were her Bible. Rule 1, never be in the woods from dusk till dawn, because the things that walk between the trees after sunset aren't always humans, and they don't want to be seen. Rule number 2, never leave the marked trail. It's marked off for a reason. Rule number 3, if you hear voices close to you, they're far away. If they sound far away, they're near. And if they say your name, do not answer. Rule number 4, don't whistle or sing in the woods. It lets them know where you are, or worse, it invites them to sing back. And rule number 5, never look too hard into the trees because you might not like what you see. And no one tells you exactly who they are or exactly what these rules are meant to protect you from, but maybe that's the point. In Appalachia, you don't question the rules, you just follow them. And today, as we step off the marked path and into the darkest corners of these haunted hills, please keep these rules in mind. In my opinion, there's no better place to start than the Bell Witch Cave. If you ask around these parts, they'll tell you the most haunted place in America isn't an asylum or an old battlefield, it's a cave. And to understand the legend, we have to go back to 1804 when John and Lucy Bell packed up their children and moved from North Carolina to the quiet farmland of Robertson County, Tennessee. At that time, Tennessee had only been an official state for 8 years, and it was still very much a raw, rugged frontier where life was harsh, isolated, and self-reliant. Infrastructure was almost non-existent, and the few roads that did exist were poorly maintained. But John Bell purchased 320 acres on the south bank of the Red River and built a homestead in this area of north central Tennessee. And this area had drawn settlers like the Bells, giving promises of fertile land and new beginnings. It was idyllic for a time, but it was also very lonely, with really no neighbors and long distances between farms. However, homesteaders were kept quite busy with the ins and outs of frontier life, and the Bells, along with their 9 children, they kept themselves occupied with farming, hunting, and surviving the seasons while they integrated themselves into the small but growing community of settlers. John Bell was described as having a commanding appearance, steadfast qualities, and a force of character that easily gave him rank and influence in this community. And John's wife, Lucy, she was kind of loved by everybody who ever met her. She was said to be an exemplary mother who ruled her children with the flowing passion of a tender, loving mother's heart. A newspaper editor writer and Civil War veteran named Martin Van Buren Ingram wrote a book about the Bell Witch hauntings in 1894, using the diary of Richard William Bell as a source. And he wrote, quote, "Everybody was in love with Mrs. Bell and wondered at the power of her influence and the charming discipline exercised in her home. It was indeed a happy and very prosperous family, as everyone recognized," end quote. So yeah, everyone respected John Bell, and everyone just loved and adored his wife, Lucy. And honestly, all of their children were great too. Well-behaved, intelligent, hard workers, polite, respectful. But the Bells' most talked about child was young Betsy, who everyone knew to be not only bright and sweet, but possessing all the feminine graces a young male suitor of the time could wish for. Many bachelors attempted to get close to Betsy and her intense, bright blue eyes, but there was one who seemed to have his affections returned, and his name was Joshua Gardner. Although Betsy was still too young to be considering a marriage, the Bell family did not discourage Gardner from stopping by once in a while and spending some chaperoned time with their young daughter. Life for the Bells and their neighbors was happy, wholesome, peaceful. But in the summer of 1817, the stillness broke. It started subtly. One morning, while the mist from the previous night still clung to the corn like a ghost that refused to leave, John Bell set out to inspect his fields. The air was damp, the ground soft beneath his boots, and the only sound was the steady creak of the leather straps holding his gear. He was halfway through the rows when he saw it, a creature standing between the stalks, perfectly still, watching him. It was unlike anything he'd ever laid eyes on. From a distance, it looked part dog, part rabbit, with unnaturally large eyes that caught the light in a way that made them seem to glow. It didn't move, didn't flinch, even when John raised his rifle and let off a single shot. And then, with a slow, deliberate turn of its head, this creature vanished. It just simply vanished into the fog, leaving not a single print in the wet earth. John Bell would tell himself later that what he had seen wasn't real. It was just a normal animal, maybe a trick of the light that made it seem like the animal disappeared, but deep down he knew better. It was the first sign that something had come to the Bell farm, and it would not leave quietly. A few days later, one of John's sons, Drew, spotted what he believed was a large turkey perched on a fence. Excitedly, Drew ran back inside to get his gun. He was like, "We're having turkey for dinner tonight." But as he approached the large bird again, this time with his gun in hand, the creature flapped its wings and took flight, revealing to Drew that this was no turkey, not a turkey at all, but some unknown bird of extraordinary size. On another evening, not long after this, Betsy ventured into the forest on their property with her younger siblings. They were going to play a game in the woods. She was just keeping an eye on the little ones so that her mother could get some cooking and washing done. And Betsy later reported to her family that while she was there, she had seen the strangest thing. Amongst the trees stood a large oak, and swinging from one of its branches was a pretty little girl dressed in a fashionable green dress. One of the Bell's servants, Dean, also reported that he would see a large black dog at the same time every night on the road leading to the Bell farm. Because Drew wouldn't stay at the Bell farm at night. He had his own home kind of further away where his wife and kids were. And so every night he would leave the Bell farm and walk down the road, and he would see this creature in the same place at the same time every night. Now, at first, John Bell and his family tried to push these sightings from their minds. A strange animal in the fields was unsettling, sure, but life on the Tennessee frontier was full of oddities. John Bell didn't know yet that it was only the beginning. Not long after that first morning in the cornfield, the nights on the Bell farm began to change. It started with faint, deliberate knocking on the walls and doors of the cabin. Not the random creak of settling wood, but sharp, measured raps like someone standing outside in the dark, wanting to be let in. John would step outside, rifle in hand, but there was never anyone there. At least, no one he could see. Soon the sounds grew bolder, more insistent, scratching along the floorboards, the distinct creak of footsteps moving across the loft when everyone was gathered downstairs, the gnawing of what sounded like rats chewing through the bedposts, except there were never any bite marks, no droppings, no signs of rats. At night, the Bell family would lie awake in bed, eyes open, listening as chains dragged across the floor or stones tumbled onto the wooden roof with no one in sight. Sometimes they heard gulping or choking sounds, as if something invisible were struggling to breathe. Once again, it was unsettling, but still almost explainable, right? A restless animal, the wind, their imagination, until those noises formed into a voice and began to speak. At first, it was just faint whispers, just beyond the edge of hearing, like someone holding a quiet conversation with themselves in the next room. Then the voice grew louder, forming clear words, seeming to float from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Sometimes it would mimic the speech of the Bell children, calling from outside when they were all accounted for inside. And the voice, it loved to argue with John, with Lucy, even with neighbors who came to witness the strange events for themselves. So a year into these strange events, the Bell family finally demanded to know who was disturbing the peace of their farming frontier lives. And one evening, with the lamps lit low and the air thick from another long day of questions with no answers, John Bell asked the voice outright who it was. Now, for me, if I'm hearing voices in my homestead for a straight year, I've already asked you who you are. Okay, day one, I hear you talking to me, I'm going to ask who you are. But, the Bells, religious people, spiritual people, they probably didn't believe in ghosts and things like that, but they should have believed in demons, right? So finally, after the year, John Bell, he's like, who are you? Who is this talking to us, bothering us, disturbing our peace? And for a moment, the room was silent. Then from a dark corner, where no one stood, came the voice, saying in a crisp, cold, and certain tone, I am Kate. The voice didn't shout. It didn't need to. And from that night forward, the Bells and all of Robertson County called it by that name, Kate. Sometimes she said she was the ghost of Kate Batts, a neighbor wronged in a business deal. Other times she claimed she was something far older and far less human. Whoever Kate truly was, she had a name and a voice now, and she used it to threaten, to mock, to predict deaths, and to remind John Bell over and over again that she wanted him dead and that she would kill him before she left the farm. For some reason, Kate had it in for John Bell, hated the man, absolutely detested him. And just on a regular basis, she was like, you're going to die, dude. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to take you out. Like, I may leave this farm one day, but I'm not leaving it with you alive. And she would just torture and tease him and mock him and threaten him day after day. And of course, after, a period of time of this happening, it is said that John Bell began to feel off, sick. I mean, why wouldn't you be, right? You're being mentally and emotionally and spiritually tortured every day. And according to Martin Van Buren Ingram, the guy who wrote the book about the Bell haunting, a strange affliction came over John Bell, and he couldn't account for it. John's tongue would suddenly become stiff for no reason, and for as long as this stiffness lasted, he was unable to eat. John said the feeling was like a small stick of wood crisscrossed in his mouth, pressing out both of his cheeks, and when he attempted to eat the food, it would be physically pushed out of his mouth. While this was happening, the presence, the ghost, the voice, Kate, still had free reign of the Bell farm, which she would sometimes vacate for a day or an hour. And she would say that while she was not there at the Bell farm in Tennessee, she was visiting the Bells' old home in North Carolina. And she would come back to the Bells in Tennessee so giddy and happy to accurately describe the going-ons there, which she wouldn't have been able to know about if she hadn't actually been visiting, North Carolina, going back to their old home. It's not like mail or even email or anything like that existed. You can't text someone in North Carolina and say, hey, tell me what the neighbors are up to. Give me all the tea so I can pretend to John Bell that I'm actually a ghost, right? According to everybody who was a part of this, what the Bells wrote, their neighbors, what they saw, this was happening. Kate was telling the Bell family about what was happening in North Carolina, where they used to live, all their old neighbors, all their old friends and family. She was talking about them, and she was able to accurately, communicate with them about what was happening there, which is weird. And although John Bell was physically not well, it seemed that his daughter, Betsy, also became one of the main targets of the specter, Kate. Betsy Bell had only been around 12 years old when the haunting began, and from the earliest days, Kate targeted her more than anyone else in the family. Betsy endured slaps, hair pulling, pinching, and even beatings so severe they would sometimes cause her to faint. But things got worse when her beau, Joshua Gardner, began seriously courting Betsy a few years into Kate making her presence known. As I said, Joshua was well-liked. He was a kind and steady man, and the Bells approved of the match. For a while, Betsy seemed really happy, but Kate made her opinion on the relationship very clear. She did not want it to happen. According to the legend, whenever Betsy and Joshua were together, walking in the yard, talking on the porch, or just exchanging furtive romantic glances, and Kate took this out on Betsy. The slaps came harder. The pinches left deep purple bruises, and at night Betsy would wake up to a sharp sting across her face and Kate's voice hissing in the darkness, "Don't you dare." Even when they were apart, Kate found ways to poison the air between Joshua and Betsy. Joshua reported hearing disembodied voices mocking him when he was alone, or feeling an oppressive weight on his chest as if something were holding him back from Betsy. The more their relationship grew, the worse the haunting became, and finally, after years of torture and fear, Betsy sadly ended her engagement. She later said she loved Joshua, but she had no doubt that Kate would make any life they had together a living hell. What did Kate have against John Bell? I don't know. What did Kate have against his daughter Betsy? I don't know. Why did Kate not want Betsy and Joshua to be together? I don't know. Maybe Kate just didn't like happiness. Maybe Kate didn't like love. Who knows? But she definitely picked her targets in the home and in the Bell family. And those two targets were John Bell and his daughter Betsy. So by that spring, the Bell farm was quieter than it had been in years, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that returned the family to their previous peace. It was the kind that follows a storm, heavy with the feeling that another storm was coming. After Betsy broke off her engagement to Joshua Gardner, the bruises faded, but the damage ran deeper. She no longer laughed the way she once had. She rarely walked alone, and though Kate still made her presence known with a whisper here and a shove there, the full-blown nightly assaults had slowed. One evening, with the whole family gathered in the front room, Kate's voice came once again, not from the loft, not from the walls, but right there among them, as if she was seated in an empty chair. "I will be leaving," Kate informed the family, "but I will return in 7 years." Now, the Bells didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. Kate didn't explain where she was going or why, only that she would be back, and when she was, they would know it. In the months that followed, Kate seemed to fade from daily life, but before her departure, she delivered one last cruel victory: the death of John Bell. John had grown weaker for months. His face was pale. His hands were trembling constantly. On December 20th, 1820, he was found in bed, barely conscious. On the table beside him sat a small vial of a strange dark liquid that no one recognized. And when the contents of the vial were given to the family cat, the animal died instantly. So nowadays, we would send that vial to a forensics lab to get it tested, have toxicology done on John Bell, but back then, they didn't have forensics labs, so they were like, is this poison? Let's give it to our cat. I don't know why you would give the poison to your family cat, but that's what happened, and the cat died. John Bell and the cat are... John Bell also died that same day, and his funeral drew hundreds. But according to the legend, Kate's voice could be heard laughing and singing loudly throughout the service, taking responsibility for the downfall of a great and highly respected man. And then, just as she had promised, Kate was gone. Now, if you look up this case, you will see claims that John Bell's death is the only one in American history blamed on a supernatural entity. This is a claim that was never written into law, so it's not like they went to court and, put Kate on trial, and then they were like, yes, this ghost, this specter, this supernatural entity is definitely responsible for John Bell's death. But as far as anybody in Robertson County knew then and knows now, that's exactly what happened. It's been passed down as fact in Robertson County for over 2 centuries. So 7 years passed, and by 1828, the Bell farm looked peaceful again. The fields were green, the house was in good repair, and life had begun to move forward. John Bell Jr. now ran the household, raising his own family on the land where the haunting had once driven them to the edge of sanity. To most of the people in Robertson County, Kate, who was now known as the Bell Witch, was nothing more than a bad memory, a strange story whispered by neighbors, a tale to scare children into obedience. But John Jr. had not forgotten Kate's final words to them 7 years prior. And then, one quiet evening, Kate kept her promise. It began the way it had before, with a voice that came out of nowhere. Kate greeted John Jr. as if no time had passed at all, speaking in the same sharp, knowing tone she had used with his father. For the next 2 weeks, Kate came and went as she pleased, holding long conversations with John Jr. on everything from family matters to the fate of mankind to religion. It was said that the ghost could quote long Bible scriptures on demand. She offered predictions, discussed Bible verses, and hinted at events yet to come. Sometimes she was cordial, sometimes she was callous, but she never raised a hand against John Jr. or any member of his family. And then, just as suddenly as she had returned, Kate was gone again. Some say this was truly the end of the Bell Witch haunting. Others believe that she never left at all, that she simply sank back into the dark places she had come from, waiting for the right moment to show herself again. After the brief 1828 return to visit John Bell Jr., Kate vanished from the historical record. Life on the Bell farm once again settled into something resembling normal, even though at this point they're probably just waiting for the other shoe to drop at any time. But John Bell Jr.'s family lived on that land for years without further incident. But over time, various portions of the land passed to other Bell descendants or were sold off. And by the late 19th century, the Bell home had been torn down and most of the original 320 acres had been divided amongst different owners. However, one piece of the property remained the same: a limestone cave along the south bank of the Red River. In the 1930s, more than 100 years after the Bell family had been tormented by her, people say that Kate returned again, and this time, she was in the cave. People began to hear growls in the dark, a voice calling out, almost as if the voice was trying to draw someone into the darkness of the cave. Locals eventually began to wonder if the cave was more than just a landmark. Some said it had been the place that Kate had retreated to when she ceased her torment of the Bell family. Others believe it was the place she had come from in the first place, a dark, damp mouth in the earth where something ancient waited for anyone foolish enough to disturb it. The cave was not mentioned in the earliest written accounts of the Bell Witch story, but by the early 20th century, it had become a central part of the folklore. People began visiting, hoping to make contact with Kate, and according to many, she was happy to oblige. Now, the cave sits just off Eden Road in Adams, Tennessee, not far from where the Bell farm once stood. Inside, the air is cold and still. The walls are slick with moisture. The farther in you go, the more the darkness swallows you, and the more people say they can feel Kate. Over the decades, stories have piled up like limestone layers. Visitors often report hearing deep animal-like growls or the sounds of someone breathing just behind them. The sound of a woman's voice calling names, a child's giggle, and a guttural moaning seem to come from the stone itself and echo through the cave so that no one can tell exactly where the sounds are coming from. Some have even reported feeling physically touched or grabbed by Kate, like a rogue haunted houseworker. Sudden shoves, tugs on clothing, a cold hand brushing against bare skin. In 1977, soldiers visiting the cave claimed one of them was grabbed around the chest and squeezed so hard he could barely breathe. Flashlights and camera batteries are said to drain instantly upon entry to the cave, only to begin working again once outside, and people claim to see a woman in old-fashioned clothes fading into the stone, along with shadowy figures darting through the passages. And deep inside the Bell Witch cave, past the narrow limestone passages and low ceilings, there's a vertical crevice carved into the stone. Locals and guides simply call it the pit, and it drops several feet down, narrowing as it goes, creating a black, jagged shaft that swallows all light. The exact depth of the pit isn't advertised, partly because of safety concerns, and partly because the bottom isn't really visible from the top, even with a strong flashlight. Those who stand near the pit report sudden dizziness, panic, or even fainting. They claim they can hear knocking coming from deep inside the shaft, faint murmurs and rushing air that sounds more like breathing than wind. Some even swear they have heard their own name whispered from the mysterious darkness. Paranormal enthusiasts and local storytellers believe the pit is a portal, either to the spirit world or something much darker. Some legends say that Kate herself came from the pit, emerging from the earth long before the Bell family ever settled nearby. Paranormal investigators claim to have recorded EVPs in the form of whispers, growls, and what sounds like a woman's laughter. In the 70s, a visiting psychic reportedly broke down screaming after standing at the pit's edge, insisting something dark and furious was looking up at her. Obviously, she refused to enter the cave again after that. A few locals believe that the pit connects to an underground network of caves that stretches far beyond the Red River, making it not just a symbolic but a physical doorway to the unknown. Who was Kate? Is she the ghost of some angry woman? Is she a demon from the underworld? What actually happened there? Why did she haunt the Bell family? What was the reason? Did she have some long-standing rivalry with their ancestors? No one really knows, but the Bell Witch legend has survived for over 2 centuries, not just because it's a good ghost story, but because no one can agree on what actually happened. It could have been a hoax, born from a mix of neighborly gossip, family tensions, and the fertile imagination of a small superstitious community, because you see, the early 1800s marked the Second Great Awakening, a wave of evangelical revivalism across the American frontier. Church gatherings were major social events that included hellfire, sermons, tent revivals, and traveling preachers, and the religious climate fostered a worldview where spiritual warfare, demonic possession, and God's punishment were deeply believed and perfectly primed for stories like the Bell Witch haunting. In this environment, stories spread by word of mouth, and they were born out of fear, faith, and the need to explain the unexplainable. The isolation, religious fervor, and old world superstitions brought by the settlers created a perfect storm for stories just like this. And more importantly, people, they did actually believe them. Whole communities were known to be gripped by a ghost story, a curse, or a supposed witch haunting a family on a lonely farm. It's also said that Martin Van Buren Ingram's 1894 book exaggerated and even invented details, turning rumors into something bigger, stranger, and more marketable. But there are some who do believe that Kate was a real ghost, a spirit stuck in the human plane, bent on revenge against John Bell or anyone who crossed her. But if that's true, how do you explain her knowledge of scripture, her predictions of death and future events, and the way she seemed to be in multiple places at once? As far as ghost stories go, Kate seemed to hold more power in her little ghostly pinky finger than most spirits we've ever heard of. And then, of course, there's the darker theory that Kate wasn't ever human at all, that she was something older, something closer to what the Bible calls a familiar spirit or demon. Was Kate something that didn't just haunt the Bells, but attached itself to the very land the farm stood on, feeding on fear and chaos? There's also a theory that sidesteps ghosts and demons entirely, and this theory states that the land itself is responsible. The Bell Witch Cave is just one of countless caverns threading beneath the Appalachian foothills, part of an ancient network of limestone passages stretching for miles. What if those tunnels hold something? Creatures that we humans are unaware of, dark energy, portals to different places or even different times. Something older than the Cherokee who first called this place home, something we don't even have a definition for yet. Whatever Kate was, or is, she has outlived the Bells in their home. Her story has seeped into the soil, the water, the caves, and it has become impossible to separate the land from the legend. And maybe that's partly why the Appalachian region feels so strange, so ancient, so heavy with unseen eyes. Maybe that's the real secret of Appalachia, that some of its mysteries aren't floating through the air or hiding in the shadows, but baked deep into the land itself. You can feel it in certain places, a heaviness under your boots, like the earth is holding its breath. And sometimes the ground doesn't just feel wrong, it is wrong. In the rolling backwoods of North Carolina, there's a place where the earth has been bare for as long as anyone can remember. Nothing will grow there, not grass, not weeds, not even the smallest wildflower. Animals avoid it, people fear it, and they call it the Devil's Tramping Ground. And it is our next stop as we journey through the tales from Appalachia. Deep in the pine forests of Chatham County, North Carolina, about 50 miles south of Greensboro, there's a strange, perfect circle burned into the earth. It's roughly 40 feet across, The ground is bare, no grass, no weeds, not even moss, and the strangest thing, no matter how many times people try to plant something there, nothing takes root. For generations, people have said this is where the devil himself came to pace in circles, plotting ways to bring misery into the world. They say the devil's presence scorches the earth beneath his feet, killing anything that dares to grow there. Now, the Devil's Tramping Ground isn't in some bustling tourist spot. It lies hidden in the quiet backwoods of Chatham County, North Carolina. To get there, you leave behind paved roads and streetlights, trading them for narrow dirt tracks hemmed in by thick pine forest. By the time you step out of your car, it's just you, the wind in the branches, and the circle, the strange, mysterious circle. Now, this land has been lived on for centuries, first by indigenous tribes who, according to settler lore, avoided this spot entirely. Then came the settlers, bringing with them old world tales of fairy rings and cursed soil. Many of the people who settled in this region were Scottish Presbyterians who were immigrating to the New World from Ulster in Northern Ireland. Many initially landed in Pennsylvania, and they headed towards the promise of cheap, available land and religious freedom. So you've got a bunch of people coming to this area from different countries, trying to find a better life. And they were given promises, they were told tales like Fievel. The streets are paved in gold, right? There's no cats in America. The streets are paved in gold. So all these people are coming to get this farmland, to have their own spot, their own land where they can build a home and grow things and make their own way. But a lot of people were doing it, so a lot of the prime farmland was filling up. So as these Scots-Irish immigrants arrived to Pennsylvania, their first stop, they realized, hey, there's nothing really left here. So they got in their wagon and then they traveled down the Great Wagon Road into Virginia, the Carolinas, and eventually deeper into Appalachia. The Scots-Irish arrived with a rich oral tradition that blended Celtic mythology, pagan customs, and Christian beliefs, and unsurprisingly, many of these ideas would mesh seamlessly with the strange and wild landscape of Appalachia. There is this belief that certain locations are thin, where the veil between this world and the other world is weaker, and although these places could be beautiful, they could also be dangerous, attracting spirits, fae, or darker entities. In Celtic folklore, perfectly round and barren patches, especially in forests or meadows, are seen as fairy rings, or the dancing grounds of witches. In the old stories, nothing grows here because it's claimed land. It's belonging to beings outside the human world, and stepping into one without permission could lead to very bad luck, illness, or even death, disappearance. Many Scots-Irish settlers arrived to America already believing that witches could curse soil so nothing would grow, and circular shapes were often associated with summoning or binding magic. So when these settlers came upon a barren, perfect circle deep in the Chatham County woods, a place where nothing grew, where animals refused to step, they didn't see a quirk of nature. They saw a claim staked by something older and more powerful than themselves. Generations of farmers, hunters, and wanderers have stood there, staring at the place where nothing grows, wondering what it is they're looking at and whether it's looking back at them. The earliest printed record of the Devil's Tramping Ground that I've found dates back to 1881 in a letter to the Weekly Star, which was a North Carolina newspaper, and then that story quickly circulated through multiple publications. Now, the Star described the circle to be as perfect as though drawn with compasses, and the article claimed it was an infertile space, known to the oldest inhabitants and his grandparents as the Devil's Tramping Ground, which is how this barren circle got its name. But that wasn't the end of the story. At the time, elders still alive quoted stories they had heard from their grandparents, tales reaching back into the 1700s before the founding of this country. That means this circle of barren earth has been unsettling people long before America was even born. Chatham County locals claim the 40-foot near-perfect circle has been barren for at least 300 years, and that anything planted in there quickly dies. They also claim that items left inside the circle overnight either vanish or are found tossed outside of the circle by first morning light. North Carolina soil scientist Richard Hayes began investigating the Devil's Tramping Grounds in the mid-2000s. He was driven by curiosity about why nothing, absolutely nothing, grows there. His goal was to identify any natural, environmental explanation for the persistent lack of plant life in the circle. In September of 2015, Hayes conducted a round of soil tests, and he sent the samples directly to a state lab for an advanced analysis. He collected samples from inside the barren circle as well as from surrounding areas, and he had these samples checked for mineral levels like sodium, heavy metals, pH, and potential plant toxins. Hayes' tests revealed elevated levels of certain minerals, including sodium, copper, and zinc, within the samples taken from the circle as compared to samples taken from outside the circle. Now, the soil inside the circle, it did show a higher pH, which indicates higher levels of acidity. However, none of these elevated levels reached a threshold severe enough to conclusively explain why the plants wouldn't grow. In short, Hayes stated, quote, "None of the data we got showed us that plants couldn't live there," end quote. Over the years, plenty of people have tried to explain the Devil's Tramping Ground in purely natural terms, and on paper, it makes sense. Usually, when there's a scientific explanation, there's also physical evidence to back up that explanation. But here, that evidence just doesn't exist. Some point to unusual soil chemistry, but while tests have shown minor differences inside the circle, nothing in those numbers is extreme enough to stop all plant growth. Others suggest old salt deposits, but no trace of concentrated salt has ever been found in those soil samples. An idea has even been floated around of slow underground gas leaks or geothermal activity, but no one has recorded any gas emissions or temperature changes beneath the site. Now, a theory that interests me is one that centers around the possibility that repeated campfires or an ancient burn could have altered the soil. This theory suggests that the Devil's Tramping Ground might be the remnant of an intense or repeatedly used fire site, perhaps a massive campfire, a signal fire, or even the location of a historic burning ritual. The idea is that intense heat over time could have sterilized the soil, killing off microorganisms and altering the soil chemistry enough to prevent regrowth. Out of all the logical theories, this is the one I lean towards the most because a large sustained fire can raise soil temperatures enough to kill off all living matter down to several inches or more, which would make it inhospitable to plants temporarily. There is still a problem with this theory, however, because nature recovers quickly. Even after catastrophic wildfires, plant life usually begins reclaiming the area within just a few years. In soil that is very nutrient deficient, it might take decades, but not centuries. And the Devil's Tramping Ground has reportedly remained barren for at least over 200 years. Additionally, the soil analysis showed no distinct charcoal layers, no carbon residues or chemical markers that you would expect to find in a site burned repeatedly or with extreme heat intensity. So now let's talk about the less logical theories, not only because the scientific ones have failed us, but because it is Harloween after all. In Celtic and Scottish traditions, which heavily influenced the settlers who came to Appalachia, circles were often central to rituals, either as protective boundaries to keep something in or out, or as summoning spaces. These traditions carried over into the New World, blending with Appalachian superstition. A circle devoid of life was considered a dangerous liminal space, where the veil between the worlds was thin. And this theory proposes that the Devil's Tramping Ground is not a natural oddity at all, but a place deliberately chosen and used for supernatural purposes, either by witches, occultists, or something darker. The perfectly round, perpetually barren circle has parallels in European and Appalachian folklore, where similar clearings were said to be dancing grounds for witches or for the devil himself. Folklore often places these gatherings on nights of heightened supernatural power, such as the full moon, Midsummer's Eve, All Hallows' Eve, or April 30th, which is Walpurgis Night, and they would happen in isolated, out-of-the-way clearings, just like the area where the Devil's Tramping Ground can be found. Dancing with the devil symbolized turning oneself over to the dark side, sealing your allegiance to Satan in exchange for power or protection. Many descriptions showed the dances as inverted religious ceremonies, the devil as a dark priest, the witches his faithful following, and all of them stomping and stamping and spinning in a circle to raise energy for spells, summon spirits, and open doorways to another world. The Devil's Dance was not just a metaphor, because many truly believed that it was a literal physical act that left marks on the ground. In past times, these barren rings were interpreted as proof that the devil himself had visited, and in Protestant Scotland and Puritan New England, these beliefs were 100% taken seriously enough to be used, in testimony during witch trials where witnesses would claim to have seen accused witches dancing in moonlit circles. In these stories, the devil often appeared in the shape of a man, a large black dog, or a goat. And another theory brings us back to this supposed underground energy or cave network that lies under the Appalachia region. Now, we have talked about cave systems and things before. When we talk about national parks, Missing 411, we've talked about these cave systems in Harloween before. And it is true that the Appalachian Mountains are home to one of the largest and most complex cave systems in North America. There are two important things to understand here. One, much of the mountain range is made of limestone, dolomite, and other soluble rocks. And two, the Appalachian Mountains are at least 480 million years old. So over the centuries, as water from rain and melted snow slowly dissolved the rock, caves, sinkholes, and underground rivers were created. Take, for instance, the Mammoth Cave system in Kentucky. Today, Mammoth Cave is a crown jewel of Kentucky's tourism industry, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the world's longest known cave system, with over 400 miles of mapped passages and more being explored each year. Visitors can enter these caves, and they can choose from well-lit walking tours to challenging wild cave expeditions, squeezing through narrow stone corridors and wading through underground rivers, which sounds absolutely claustrophobic and horrific to me. I will never go. You will never catch me wandering around in a cave system. All right? Nope. All set with that. Have you ever seen those people that get stuck when they're going through the caves and they're squeezing through these really tight spaces and they get stuck and nobody can get them out? It's a hard pass from me. Now, above the Mammoth Cave system, there's a park, and that park stretches over 50,000 acres of rolling hills, dense forest, and hidden sinkholes, making it just as striking on the surface as it is below. It's a place where science, adventure, and natural beauty collide. But step off the tour path and you may find yourself walking into stories that are far older, far stranger, and far more unsettling than the brochures would dare to print. Or maybe they would print it actually, because people seem to love this stuff. I know I do. Not enough to go into some tiny caves, but I love it. So according to a 2009 account in National Parks Traveler, Mammoth Cave has over 150 documented paranormal events reported by credible witnesses such as park rangers, scientists, and seasoned tour guides. While the official records don't list sightings that actually or literally number 150 visible ghosts, that number supposedly reflects the totality of events. So strange sounds, unexplained sensations, odd lights, and occasional anomalous figures reported deep in the passages. National Parks Traveler also calls Mammoth Cave National Park the most haunted natural wonder in the world, and park rangers Colleen O'Connor Olson and Charles Hannion have even recorded many of the park's spookiest tales in their book, Scary Stories of Mammoth Cave. Archaeological evidence shows that Native Americans were venturing deep into Mammoth Cave thousands of years ago, long before recorded history. These early peoples, such as the Cherokee and the Shawnee tribes, mined gypsum, epsomite, and other minerals from the cave walls, likely for medicinal, ceremonial, and possibly even decorative purposes. Remains of woven sandals, cane torches, and petroglyphs have been found far inside the passages. For thousands of years, Mammoth Cave wasn't just a place to mine salts or seek shelter, it was also a sacred burial ground. Archaeologists have uncovered naturally mummified Native American remains carefully dressed and enclosed in stone graves. One of the most striking stories comes from 1812, when an ancient woman was found seated in a stone coffin buried with deer skins, beads, and feather ornaments. These were no casual internments. They were intentional ceremonial rites beneath the earth. In many Native American traditions, particularly among the Cherokee, the universe is composed of three worlds: the serene upper world of guiding spirits, our middle world of daily life and balance, and the chaotic underworld beneath the earth. These worlds were connected by sacred portals where spirits could cross the boundary. To these tribes, caves like Mammoth weren't just places of refuge or resource, they were spiritual doorways, portals to other realms, sacred thresholds where visions, rituals, and contact with the spirit world could happen. In 1798, settlers began using Mammoth Cave for mining saltpeter, an essential ingredient in gunpowder. This activity intensified during the War of 1812, making the cave an important economic asset, because the war is happening, so you need gunpowder. But the mining work also revealed more and more of the cave system's vast chambers. After the war, the need for gunpowder obviously dropped off, and so the demand for saltpeter also decreased a lot and fast, and this led to some industrious thinking on the part of the cave owners, who wanted to figure out how they were going to make money with these stupid caves now, right? Because they bought all these caves, because they were going to make money from the saltpeter mining and making gunpowder, and now there's no need for it because the war is over, which the cave owners were sad about, because it financially hurt them. And they were like, well, we have all these caves. What the hell are we going to do with them? But the timing could not have been more ideal, because this would have been the Victorian era. And at that time, people were intensely fascinated by exploration, science, history, the macabre, and the exotic. The 19th century was also an era obsessed with the natural wonders of America, like Niagara Falls, which had already become a major tourist attraction. Mammoth Cave fit perfectly into this cultural appetite. In the 1800s, there was simply nothing else like it in the United States. A seemingly endless underground world that felt both exotic and dangerous, perfect for the romantic era fascination with adventure and the otherworldly. But Mammoth Cave isn't just otherworldly in appearance. It truly is, in a way, another world altogether. Beneath the surface lies a realm with its own rules, its own ecosystem, and its own creatures that exist nowhere else on Earth. In fact, more than 130 unique species live inside the Mammoth Cave system. Many of them have specially adapted to the darkness and the silence and the strange pressures of an underground world. It almost feels like nature created its own cryptids. Take the blind cavefish, a ghostly white fish that has no eyes at all. Navigation with this fish is done through vibration and water pressure, like a living sonar. Or the cave crawfish, albino and translucent, whose body looks almost unfinished, as though these fish belong to another realm. Some of the strangest residents are the cave salamanders and the olm-like creatures, which can live decades in complete darkness, surviving on nearly nothing, moving so little they appear more like spirits than animals. Even the insects have adapted to blend with shadows, pale and fragile, skittering across the stone in silence. Scientists marvel at these creatures as products of evolution, but when you stand in those caves surrounded by life that has adapted in ways we can barely comprehend, it feels less like science and more like something supernatural, a world running parallel to ours, hidden just beneath our feet. And it raises an unsettling question. If nature can create cryptids like these in the dark, what else might be lurking in the endless miles of unexplored caverns? Scientists might classify the cavefish and albino salamanders as evolutionary wonders, but for centuries, locals have whispered about stranger things inhabiting the caves, things that science has yet to name. Just as the land above Appalachia is littered with ghost stories, the underground has spawned its own legends. People talk of humanoid creatures lurking in the dark, small and pale things with glowing eyes that watch trespassers before vanishing into tunnels that seem to lead to nowhere. These rumors became especially well known in Kentucky, where stories of the so-called Kentucky goblins began circulating after a 1955 encounter in Hopkinsville. Witnesses swore they saw small goblin-like beings emerge from the woods and fields, darting in and out of the shadows as if they were coming from the earth itself. And some have connected them to Mammoth Cave and its endless network of passages, suggesting these beings live down there, surfacing only when they're hungry or curious. And I want to talk a little more about the Hopkinsville encounter, also known as the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins case. So it happened on the night of August 21st, 1955, in the quiet farming community of Kelly, Kentucky, just outside of Hopkinsville. And this event would lead two families to experience something that defied explanation. The Sutton and Taylor households were gathered in a small farmhouse when one of the men, Billy Ray Taylor, stepped outside to fetch water from the well. As he crossed the yard, he claimed he saw a bright, silvery object streak across the sky before vanishing into a nearby gully. At first, he and the others brushed it off, but soon the real nightmare began. From the edge of the woods, small beings emerged, no more than 3 feet tall, with oversized heads, pointed ears, glowing yellow eyes, and arms so long their clawed hands nearly dragged the ground. Their skin shimmered with a metallic sheen, and the way they moved was strange, gliding, swaying, almost weightless, like something not meant for this earth. Terrified, the families barricaded themselves inside the cabin. But the creatures crept closer, scratching at the door, peering in through the windows, or even climbing onto the roof. The men opened fire with rifles and shotguns, but no matter how many times these creatures were hit, they never seemed hurt. They would fall, rise again, and retreat into the shadows, only to return minutes later. The attack went on for hours, an eerie siege that left the families shaken to their core. By midnight, they fled into Hopkinsville, bursting into the police station in a state of sheer panic. Law enforcement, state troopers, and even military police descended on the farmhouse. They found bullet holes in the siding, and they found shattered windows, which was clear evidence the family had unleashed a barrage of gunfire, but there was no trace of the strange intruders. And yet, as soon as the authorities left, the beings returned, resuming their silent, unnerving watch until dawn. Now, the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter is often treated as one of the more credible close encounter cases in American folklore and UFO and cryptid studies. That's largely because of who was involved and how consistent their testimony was. Unlike many UFO or cryptid stories where only 1 or 2 people report an event, this case had at least 11 eyewitnesses, including men, women, and children, ranging from young kids to middle-aged adults. Police Chief Russell Greenwell would later say, quote, "These aren't the kind of people who normally run to the police for help. What they do is reach for their guns," end quote. And they did reach for their guns, right? And they could not take these creatures out. And I almost wonder, if this is true. Let's just go along with it, pretend it's true, because I want to. When they shot the creatures and then the creatures ran off into the woods and reappeared again later, I wonder if they were shooting the creatures ran into the woods to die, and then they were just replaced with new creatures of their species that look just like them, right? Because that would make more sense than these weird creatures are just, not able to be killed and they regenerate. But I guess if they're an alien species, that could be true. However, the people who experienced this, who went through this, who were terrified when they got to the police station, they truly believe it happened, right? And these were people who were respected with solid reputations. And they all described essentially the same beings and the same series of events. Glowing-eyed creatures with spindly limbs who moved strangely. An hours-long siege of the farmhouse. These people all stuck to their stories during questioning and intense scrutiny. And law enforcement at the time reported that the witnesses appeared genuinely terrified and not intoxicated at all. And police did find evidence of heavy gunfire and panic at the farmhouse. So while they did not find flying saucers or glowing-eyed creatures, the sheer amount of gunfire suggested that the families at least believed they were under attack by something real, something dangerous, something that scared them. To skeptics, the Hopkinsville creatures were nothing more than owls, their glowing eyes and aggressive swoops misinterpreted in the dark. But to others, the Sutton farm was the site of either a close encounter with beings from another world or perhaps something that had always lived much closer to home. Some believe the creatures came not from the sky at all, but from the vast and ancient cave systems beneath Kentucky, like Mammoth Cave, emerging only briefly to remind us that the underworld beneath our feet may not be as empty as we think. And it doesn't stop there. Appalachian folklore brims with accounts of cave-dwelling cryptids, like the Raven Mocker, a Cherokee legend who's said to fly at night, feeding on the life force of the sick. In Cherokee belief, the raven mocker is not only considered to be a witch, but the most evil of all witches, and its name comes from the eerie crying or mocking sounds of a raven as it approaches its victims, a cry that is said to be a precursor to death. The raven mocker actively seeks out the dying and the weak, hoping to steal that person's lifespan, whatever's left of it. According to legend, every year it steals is added on to the witch's own life. The raven mocker is said to torment its targets, circling overhead as they lay dying, calling to them, mocking them, and when it attacks, it is said the creature rips out the hearts of its victims without leaving a mark before consuming their very essence. There is also the smoke wolf, which doesn't seem to come directly from Native American mythology in the way the raven mocker does. Instead, it's often described as part of Appalachian oral tradition, blending fears of wolves, spirits, and ghostly omens. And the earliest mentions of the smoke wolf appear to come from oral accounts of hunters, loggers, or travelers deep in the woods of the Smokies and Blue Ridge Mountains. This cryptid is said to appear as a wolf made of smoke or shadow, with glowing red or yellow eyes, and witnesses claim it doesn't move like a normal animal. It is often described as sliding or drifting across the ground, sometimes dissolving in the air. People who claim to have seen it describe an immediate sense of dread, as if the air gets heavier or colder, more suffocating as it appears. The smoke wolf is usually tied to death omens, said to appear before a tragedy, accident, or illness, and in some tales it is not an omen but a hunter of souls, stalking those lost in the woods. Some say the smoke wolf is no wolf at all but the restless spirit of the land itself, an ancient guardian conjured from the ashes of burned forests and the bones buried beneath the mountains. Others whisper that it is a shadow creature born of witchcraft, sent to stalk the living as punishment for trespassing where they shouldn't. A few tie it to the old world legends settlers carried across the ocean from Europe, black hounds that haunted lonely roads in Scotland and Ireland, transformed here into something wilder, darker, more Appalachian. And then there are those who think it's not a spirit but something flesh and blood, an undiscovered predator that hides in the caves and hollows, exhaling smoke when it steps into the night air. Each theory tries to give shape to the terror, but none leave behind tracks, bones, or proof, only stories, and the uneasy feeling that when the wind shifts just right, something is watching from the tree line. So you're left with two layers of Appalachia, the one that science can show you and the one that folklore swears is there. Both thrive in the shadows, in the caves, in the woods where sunlight doesn't reach. And that's the unnerving thing. When nature itself looks like it was designed for myths, maybe the myths aren't so far-fetched after all. From shadow wolves and death birds to witches whispering in the pines and devils dancing in the forest, the mountains of Appalachia seem to pulse with stories of creatures and spirits that blur the line between myth and nightmare. But perhaps the strangest tale of all isn't about a monster lurking in the dark or an unknown predator hidden in the caves. It's about a ghost, a real woman whose death was so unjust and so violent that her spirit refused to rest until the truth was spoken. This is not just folklore or fireside storytelling. This is the only case in American history where a ghost testimony was entered into a court of law. They called her the Greenbrier Ghost, but her name was Zona Hester Shue. Greenbrier County, West Virginia, in the late 1800s was a place where life moved slowly, shaped by the land itself. Rolling hills, tucked away hollers, and winding creeks made for beautiful but isolated living. Communities were tight-knit, held together by hard work, Sunday sermons, and an endless thread of gossip that tied neighbor to neighbor. Yet for all of its beauty, it was a land steeped deeply in superstition. Whispers of haints, restless spirits, were as common as talk of the weather, and many believed that the dead could cross back over if the living had unfinished business with them. It was in this world where faith and folklore sat side by side that a young woman named Zona Hester lived out her short and troubled life. Zona had fallen for a man, the wrong man, a tale as old as time. He was a newcomer. His name was Erasmus Trout Shue, a blacksmith who had arrived in Greenbrier with big ambitions and a restless spirit. Their marriage was quick, raising eyebrows in the small community, but Zona seemed smitten. Yet, within months of their union, tragedy struck. In January of 1897, Zona was found dead in her home. Her body was laid out in an unusual way, her neck twisted at an odd angle, and her husband's behavior raising questions almost immediately. But in those days when medicine was primitive and women's suffering was often dismissed, Zona's death was chalked up to natural causes. And that might have been the end of her story, if not for the fact that Zona refused to stay quiet. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Hester, was never convinced by Trout Shoe's story. He had insisted that Zona died from childbirth, even though there was no child, and his nervous behavior at the wake, hovering over Zona's body, refusing to let mourners near her head, and placing a scarf tightly around her neck, this gnawed at Mary Jane's suspicions. Mary Jane prayed for clarity, and if the community whispered that she was being obsessive, she ignored them. Then, one night, her daughter Zona came back. For 4 nights in a row, Mary Jane claimed that her daughter's ghost appeared at the foot of her bed. In these dreams or visions, Zona was said to be vivid and lifelike, her presence undeniable. On night 1, Zona appeared, standing at the foot of her mother's bed. Mary Jane said that although her daughter was pale and quiet and seemed to be glowing with an otherworldly light, she wasn't afraid. She felt a calm presence as the specter stared at her wordlessly. On night 2, Zona appeared again, but this time she was more vivid, and she spoke. According to Mary Jane's later testimony, Zona said, quote, "He was cruel to me. He choked me until the life went out of me." End quote. Zona described a specific argument where she hadn't cooked dinner the way her new husband liked it, and in a sudden rage, he attacked her. Zona went into greater detail on night 3, revealing that her neck had been broken and that it had snapped between the first and second vertebrae. To illustrate this, the ghost allegedly turned her head all the way around. Now, Zona's final visit on night 4 was the most intense. Her ghost is said to have floated or glided into the room and repeated a message for her mother to act. Some accounts say Mary Jane's room went cold, the lights dimmed and flickered, and when Mary Jane awoke the next morning, she found the experience so disturbing, so real, that she couldn't dismiss it as imagination. To her, this was her daughter speaking from beyond the grave. Mary Jane Hester went to the local prosecutor with her story, and at first, the authorities were reluctant since visions from the dead were not exactly legal evidence. But Mary Jane's conviction was so strong, and Trout's behavior had been so suspicious that the prosecutor ordered Zona's body to be exhumed. When doctors examined her, they found her neck broken, just as the ghost had described. Her windpipe was crushed, and her vertebrae was dislocated. The Greenbrier ghost had, in a sense, solved her own murder. Trout Shoe was arrested and brought to trial in 1897, and the evidence against him was already damning. Zona's broken neck and the prosecutor's suspicions painted him as a violent husband. But what made this case unlike any other in American legal history was the role of Mary Jane Hester and her ghostly visions. This was rural West Virginia in the late 1800s when belief in spirits and omens was not uncommon. So while Zona's ghostly testimony wasn't officially entered as evidence, the jury absolutely heard it. The defense attorney tried to make a fool of Mary Jane, and on the stand, Mary Jane was asked again and again if she had really seen her daughter's spirit. Calmly and firmly, she said yes. She told the jury that Zona had appeared to her 4 nights in a row, had spoken to her, and had even shown her how Trout killed her. Every time the lawyer tried to suggest she was lying or confused, Mary Jane stuck to her story, unshaken. And the strangest part is the jury seemed to believe her. The defense's attempt to discredit Mary Jane only made her appear more sincere and more sympathetic. Of course, the conviction wasn't based solely on ghost testimony. Doctors had confirmed Zona's neck had been broken, Trout's behavior was erratic, and his violent past came to light. This wasn't the first time he had done something to a woman. But in the minds of many, it was Zona's spirit speaking through her mother that sealed his fate. Trout Shoe was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison, where he died just a few years later. And the Greenbrier ghost case remains unique in American law. It is the only known time that a ghost's testimony directly influenced a murder trial, and it left behind a story that still unsettles the hills of Appalachia today. Was Zona truly reaching out from beyond to demand justice, or was it her mother's grief sharpened into an obsession that gave voice to the truth the community already suspected? I don't know. Let me know in the comments, because this ends our first journey through the haunted ridges and shadowed hollows of Appalachia. From the whispering woods of Tennessee, where a witch once tormented a family, to the barren circle of North Carolina, where the devil himself is said to pace, to the chilling testimony of a ghost that brought justice in a West Virginia courtroom, this land has proven that its past is never truly at rest. The ground itself seems alive with stories, secrets, and things that defy explanation, but we've only scratched the surface because the darkness of Appalachia doesn't just linger in forests and fields. It seeps into the walls of its asylums and institutions. In the next part of this series, we'll step into the halls of some of the most infamous institutions in American history, places where thousands lived and died in despair, and where visitors still claim to feel the restless presence of those who never left. If you thought the woods were unsettling, just wait until we walk the corridors of the asylums. This is just the beginning of our tales from Appalachia. And we will be back with a part 2 so that we can really explore this strange land, this strange area that has so many stories and tales that come out of it, such a rich history and culture and energy. I can't wait. I really enjoyed talking about all of this stuff with you guys today. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you like this kind of sort of format? I've done a Tales from the Everglades before in past Halloweens. I've done a Tales from Denver International Airport before in past Halloweens. Did you like this? Which story was your favorite? Let me know in the comments section. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe, and stay spooky. I'll see you very, very soon. Bye.